Number 39. The increasing complexity of scientific inquiry has led to a proliferation of multi author technical articles. Reports of clinical trials involving patients from several hospitals are usually co authored by physicians from each participating hospital. Likewise, physics papers reporting results from experiments using subsystems developed at various laboratories generally have authors from each laboratory. So we know that scientific inquiry is becoming more complex, and that means that we now have more and more multi-authored technical articles, and they give us examples of that. One is that there are clinical trials reports with patients from different hospitals. So they'll usually have authors who are physicians from each of those hospitals that participated in that trial. Another example they gave us is when physicists are having experiments that use subsystems that were made at different laboratories. These papers about these experiments are going to have authors from each of those laboratories that contributed towards this experiment. So, if all of these statements are true, then which one of the following must also be true? A. Clinical trials involving patients from several hospitals are never conducted solely by physicians from just one hospital. We don't know that. Um, we don't actually know anything about who's conducting trials, if you wanna get technical about it. We know who's reporting them. We don't know who's running these actual clinical trials, so I can't even prove A based off of that. So A would be out. B, most reports of clinical trials involving patients from several hospitals have multiple authors. This would make a lot of sense. Our second sentence, which is our first example, tells us that when there's clinical trials with patients from different hospitals, they're usually co authored by physicians from each of those hospitals. B says that if there's clinical trials that have patients from different hospitals, most of those reports will have multiple authors because there's going to be authors from every hospital represented. So B makes a lot of sense, and I like it the best so far. C, when a technical article has multiple authors, they're usually from several different institutions. The word usually throws me off because we never really talked about how often or how frequently we'll have authors from different institutions when there are articles with multiple authors. So that's a really weird answer, and I don't like it. D. Physics papers authored by researchers from multiple laboratories usually report results from experiments using subsystems developed at each laboratory. So I think D looks really tempting because it looks very familiar. But if you look at that last sentence in our stimulus, it's kind of reversing what we talked about. In our stimulus, we said that when there's experiments using subsystems at different laboratories, then the papers will generally have authors from each of those laboratories. And in the answer choice, we're saying when our papers have researchers from multiple laboratories, it's because these reports are these reports are having results from experiments that actually use subsystems from different laboratories. So it's switching up the order and the relationship between the two things we're talking about. So D's out. And E, most technical articles are authored solely by the researchers who conducted the experiments these articles report. Again, we don't talk anything about conducting experiments, so off the bat, it's a little off to me. Second, we don't know who's actually authoring these experiments. We know that the authors are going to come from each of the institutions represented, but we don't necessarily know if those people were directly involved in the actual experiments themselves. So E would be out for that reason, and I'm still left with B as my answer choice.